Invasion is the sequel of Attraction. The action takes place several years after the events of Attraction. Earth has enjoyed a period of relative peace and prosperity, thanks in part to the alliance formed with the Taurus aliens. News of the arrival of extraterrestrials in Russia spread throughout the world. The most highlighted was the loss of life that reached hundreds of people. These victims were not due to the actions of Hekon, but to the collapse of several buildings during the emergency landing of the Hekon spaceship. Finally, the United Nations agreed to form a space defense agency spearheaded by Russia, China, and America. Colonel Lebedev was appointed head of the Russian section of the department. He was tasked with coordinating Earth's response to the new threat and maintaining order in the face of growing public fear. Over the past 2 years, humans had built satellites in orbit around the Earth. These satellites aim to detect early things feared would threaten human civilization. Meanwhile, in space, a spaceship or Sol, owned by Hekon, had a kind of invisible trying to hide its existence. A capsule was seen coming out of the Sol and sliding towards the Earth. The Earth's satellites became inactive when the capsule passed it. The capsule then dived into the ocean. Yulia was enjoying an afternoon run with her dog, and several bodyguards tasked with protecting Yulia. Suddenly, the dog barked like he saw something and ran away from Yulia. Yulia tried to chase her dog, but could not find its whereabouts. The next day, Yulia was seen sitting with Google in a class. Google tried to ask about the research progress, but Yulia said it was a secret because if Yulia told Google, the guards would shoot her on the spot. After class, Google tried to say something to Yulia, but Yulia thought that Google wanted to express his feelings. She told Google that the friend zone would be safer for their relationship. Colonel Lebedev then picked them up in several escort cars. After delivering Google to his workplace, their group went to a secret research building. In the secret research building, the exoskeleton left by the previous Hekon was currently being researched and tried to be developed by scientists. In another room, Yulia was also under research. It was known that every emotion that exists in Yulia can cause a very significant change in wave amplitude. Scientists were trying to decode the technology stored in Yulia's bracelet so that it made Yulia the only person who could do it. Unbeknownst to Yulia, the scientists deliberately brought Artyom to provoke more incredible emotions in Yulia. Artyom has suffered an acute brain tissue disorder commonly known as a stroke. Yulia, who realized Artyom's presence, then asked to be released. But the scientists still forced Artyom to continue talking to Yulia. Yulia, who was getting more and more into her emotions, was suddenly able to create a large wave of water around her. The tide was even able to shake the entire research building. Colonel Lebedev realized and rushed to Yulia's research room and noticed Artyom's presence without his knowledge. Colonel Lebedev ordered Artyom to be taken away. He gave a military member named Ivan the task of spying on Yulia. Still, unfortunately, Ivan's presence was noticed by Yulia when he was in a bar. While having a conversation, a man with a familiar voice invited Yulia to leave. It turned out that the man was Hekon, who introduced himself to Ivan by keratin. Hekon would take Yulia away and then be blocked by Ivan. There was a fight between Ivan and Hekon, but suddenly Yulia got up and hit Ivan's head, which made Ivan unconscious. Yulia and Hekon then ran out of the bar. Hekon then contacted Sol using Yulia's mobile phone. Sol detected Hekon's presence and took control of the car with the nearest advanced technology. Hekon and Yulia then entered the vehicle along with the car's owner in confusion, but suddenly Ivan was in front of them. Sol then controlled the car until Ivan fell. Ivan then reported this to Colonel Lebedev. Colonel Lebedev recognized the characteristics of the man Ivan told him about and then realized that Hekon had returned. Immediately, he ordered an evacuation to the defense minister's building. When Hekon and Yulia escaped, Sol controlled CCTV cars and arranged traffic signs that become their escape route. In the car, Hekon told Yulia he was in danger because the research on him had gone too far. Hekon then invited Yulia to fly. Meanwhile, Ivan, still chasing them on a motorbike, shot one of the car's wheels. Ivan simultaneously crashed into another car and was thrown from his motorbike. Sol tried to control his car to save Ivan's landing because in Sol's protocol, there should be no casualties during this escape. They finally arrived at an old house. In this house, it turned out that Yulia met her missing dog. Next, it was discovered that Hekon had been living in this house since 123 days ago. During that time, Hekon also survived by making a vegetable garden. While looking at the garden, suddenly someone knocked on the door, and when Yulia opened it, it turned out to be Google carrying food. Google previously tried to tell Yulia about Hekon's existence, but Yulia thought that Google was trying to express his feelings. From Hekon's confession, it was known that after Hekon flew, he settled in space for 1 week. But in the Earth's calendar, it has lasted for 2 years. Hekon admitted that he had violated the protocols of his planet. Scene then moved to Saul, and something huge appeared behind him. The next day, Yulia contacted her father with a video call and informed him that she was fine and with Hekon. After the conversation, Colonel Lebedev asked his members to track Yulia's signal and ordered them to make a non-violent arrest. The military assigned by Colonel Lebedev was already around Hekon's house. They then reported to Colonel Lebedev that there were only 2 people and they appeared to be unarmed. Colonel Lebedev then ordered an ambush without using weapons, but the communication from Colonel Lebedev heard by the military was then manipulated by aliens. A new and enigmatic alien species, known as the Reptorians or Rands, took over. The order from Colonel Lebedev's order was changed to kill them. After hearing the ruling from Colonel Lebedev to shoot to kill immediately, the military stormed Hekon's home. Hekon had dropped some army before finally escaping with Yulia to the river, and suddenly from the river, a capsule appeared. Hekon then jumped and entered the capsule, but unfortunately Yulia, who was waiting for her dog, was shot in her right shoulder. Hekon immediately pulled Yulia and then left. Unexpectedly, the army then launched missiles to chase the capsule. Hekon realized the approaching danger. He then performed a light jump to avoid the wheel, which should only be used outside the planet. As a result, the capsule was damaged and began to lose power. Hekon then draws all the water stored in the clouds around him to repair his capsule. The capsule finally returned to normal and could return to control and dive into the river. Artyom, who was about to be evacuated at the secret research site, tricked the officers and stole the exoskeleton used to escape. Meanwhile, Lebedev, already with Ivan, suddenly received a report that the ground forces and the air force had been activated. Colonel Lebedev was surprised because he should have had the authority about it. Back to Hekon, who tried to contact Saul, but suddenly, another voice appeared saying that Saul had been deactivated. Hekon could return and Yulia must be destroyed. Hekon realized it was not Saul and changed the capsule control to manual. After a long chase, the capsule was finally thrown from the river after being attacked from 2 directions using missiles. Hekon then pulled all the water around him to minimize the impact. A helicopter approached and intended to attack the capsule using rockets, but suddenly came Artyom with his exoskeleton trying to bring down the aircraft. Artyom jumped out of his exoskeleton and managed to bring down the aircraft. Colonel Lebedev finally trashed the capsule and found that Hekon and Yulia were no longer there, leaving only blood on the capsule. On the other hand, it turned out that Hekon managed to take Yulia away. They then met with Artyom. Artyom, who saw the gunshot wound on Yulia, intended to call a doctor. Still, Hekon prevented him and said that Yulia only needed water. Assisted by Artyom, they then read a car. In the planning, it was known that the one who disabled Saul was Rands, an artificial intelligence created to run the protocol. From Hekon's explanation, it was also known that Rands could retrieve human data on Earth very easily because humans share it through social media and other digital media for sound and personal data, so that Rands had access to the database network of all humans on Earth. Rands could even manipulate any data flow, be it civilian or military. Rands would do all things for one purpose: hunting Yulia. In a room where the Hekon capsule was kept, Ivan looked very worried about his family. He repeatedly tried to contact his wife, but to no avail. Ivan then tried to ask Colonel Lebedev for permission to leave for 30 minutes. Still, Colonel Lebedev did not consent and asked not to believe the news he got from social media. Colonel Lebedev then ordered Ivan to go and got Yulia. Moving to the observatory building, they could finally find and see the location of Rands, who was outside the Earth. Immediately, they reported this to the military. With their ancient technologies, finally Colonel Lebedev and the Minister of Defense managed to communicate. While Yulia, who finally woke up and did not find the existence of Hekon, intended to leave immediately. But when the door was opened, Ivan was in front of him. On the way, Yulia realized that Ivan had been influenced by the spread of fake news and tried to convince Ivan that she did not do it. But unfortunately, Ivan did not believe it. The military had launched a rocket missile targeted at Rand's location, and because it was likely that Rands would control the rocket, Colonel Lebedev ordered to turn off the satellite as soon as the rocket left the Earth. It was seen on their radar that the missile hit the target. The military cheered at the success, but more did not believe it before getting an actual visual. Outside the defense building, thousands of people were seen who had been provoked by the fake news spread by Rands on digital media. They asked that Yulia be punished immediately. Ivan, with Yulia in a car, finally approached the defense building. Still, someone saw Yulia in the car and immediately forced Yulia out. Fortunately, Ivan foiled the attempt. Once inside the building, Yulia finally met with Hekon while Ivan decided to resign right before Colonel Lebedev. Colonel Lebedev tried to convince Ivan that Yulia didn't do it, but it didn't work. An operator suddenly got a call from his brother Hekon, who realized it, then took over the phone and starts talking to Rands. Sure enough, Rands hasn't been destroyed. Rands said that he tried to minimize the damage, but in the case that just happened, Rands would act more aggressively. Ra also said Hekon could leave and return to his ship, but Hekon preferred staying on Earth. Then, seen on the monitor screen, Rand spoke with a visual of Yulia's face and said that many would die today. Immediately after that communication, suddenly, a celestial phenomenon occurred over the city of Moscow. The clouds seemed to form a strange swirling vortex, and soon after appeared a Rand ship. Suddenly, a large amount of water suddenly began to call from the ground. This torrent of water slowly began to merge with the clouds, which happened almost all over Moscow. Soon, a giant water dome was formed that surrounded everything inside it so that no one could get out or enter the water dome. Meanwhile, inside the dome, water began to flow over the land, and this incident almost resembled a tsunami. Even water was also seen starting to cover the Moscow city sky. Meanwhile, from outside the dome, several warplanes began trying to fire several missiles, but unfortunately, it was in vain. The military saw this as a possibility that if it was not stopped immediately, the intensity of the water would continue to increase and could drown the city in the water dome with a height of up to 343 meters. They gathered the residents to immediately go to the top of the building and use the necessary safety equipment. Colonel Lebedev told Artyom, Hekon, and Yulia to go to the helicopter. Still, Hekon chose to stay behind and let Yulia fly with Artyom. Hekon then returned to Colonel Lebedev and asked for the whereabouts of his capsule because Hekon said that he could help but with little chance of safety. Colonel Lebedev drove Hekon to where his capsule was stored. Initially, Lebedev intended to use the capsule, but unfortunately, the capsule could only be controlled by Hekon. And because Hekon needed manual navigation assistance to get to Rands, Colonel Lebedev finally helped Hekon as a navigator. Colonel Lebedev then ordered all the staff to save themselves. At the same time, he sat in the control room to provide navigation to Hekon. Meanwhile, the water continued to rise and began to submerge several buildings, and Ivan was shown surviving. Meanwhile, the helicopter that Yulia and Artyom were traveling in suddenly crashed into power lines, causing the helicopter to lose control. Fortunately, Artyom quickly took Yulia to jump out. They then rushed to try to climb to the roof of a building with the help of several other survivors. Yulia, who saw the chaos and the many casualties, began to give up. She then showed her presence to everyone and tried to admit that she was the one who would carry out the bombing and killed many people and asked everyone to kill her so that this disaster would end soon. Ivan, who saw this, took a gun from the officer and pointed it at Yulia, but Artyom, who tried to protect Yulia, was shot by Ivan right in the heart, which immediately made Artyom die. Ivan, who was still pointing a gun at Yulia, had doubts until, finally, the water held them all. In this situation, the bracelet on Yulia's hand suddenly lit up, creating a stream of water waves. Slowly, the water waves created by Yulia's hand grew more prominent and spread closer to Rands. The capsule driven by Hekon was also having difficulty getting closer to Rands. A few moments later, the water flow had surrounded Rands. Yulia, who suddenly woke up, pushed Ray to go up until finally, several fighters who saw the top of Ray began to attack using missiles and dropped an atomic bomb right above Rands. Finally, it made the potion get severe damage and slowly began to fall. Along with that, the water that formed the dome quickly began to recede. Lebedev and Yulia survived, and Rands gradually lost his light, indicating that it was no longer active. Hekon and Yulia look at Artyom's lifeless body. The scene then moved to a cemetery where Lebedev, Google, and some of Yulia's friends attend the funeral. It turned out that it is the grave of Yulia, and it could be guessed that Yulia's death was deliberately faked. The film closes with a scene of Yulia, Hekon, and her dog near a lake, seemingly in a peaceful and secluded place where they could live without being found. They were together, and Hekon's ship, Sol, reappeared from the water, suggesting they had the means to travel or protect themselves. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next video.